In parts of the Netherlands, the ground lies several meters below the level used to measure the sea. Roads cross fields that survive only because water is continuously collected, pumped, and released. Rivers pass through densely populated land behind engineered banks. Along the coast, gates large enough to reshape an estuary wait for the next dangerous surge. By ordinary logic, this landscape should belong to water. Instead, it holds farms, railways, airports, ports, and cities. About a quarter of the Netherlands lies below sea level. A much larger share could be exposed to flooding if its defenses failed under extreme conditions. Yet, more than 18 million people live in this small European country. The economic heart of the nation occupies precisely the kind of low, crowded delta where a flood could become a national crisis. The Netherlands exists not because the danger disappeared, but because water management became part of the machinery of the state. How did communities turn wetlands and shallow lakes into permanent ground? Why did one night in 1953 force the Netherlands to rebuild its coastline? How can a barrier stop the North Sea without completely sealing off a living estuary? And why, after constructing some of the most advanced flood defenses on Earth, are Dutch planners now giving certain rivers more room instead of building ever higher walls? The answers begin with the geography beneath the country. The Netherlands occupies the lower reaches of a great European delta. The Rhine, the Maeslant, and branches connected to the Scheldt approach the North Sea across terrain with little natural height. Water reaches the country from two directions. Storm surges can push inland from the coast, while rain and melting snow can send enormous volumes down rivers from other parts of Europe. Protecting the land from the sea is only half the problem. The rivers must still be allowed to reach it. Long before concrete barriers, people lived on the higher fragments of this landscape. Settlements developed beside tidal channels, rivers, marshes, and peatlands. Communities raised ground, built embankments, and linked smaller defenses into longer dikes. This was not one uninterrupted national project. It was a gradual accumulation of local solutions. A farmer protecting a field, a village maintaining a drainage channel, and neighboring settlements sharing a dike were all responding to the same fact. Water ignored property lines. One of the defining Dutch solutions was the polder, an enclosed area where the water level is controlled artificially. A polder may be reclaimed from a lake or formed by draining wet ground behind dikes, but a dike alone does not make the land dry. Rain still falls inside. Groundwater still rises. Water must be guided into canals and lifted toward a higher outlet. A polder is not simply land taken from water. It is land that remains usable only while an entire drainage system continues to work. The windmills at Kinderdijk preserve this older system in visible form. 19 drainage mills stand within a landscape of polders, reservoirs, channels, sluices, pumping stations, and dikes. The mills used wind power to lift water in stages until it could be discharged toward the rivers, but their deeper meaning is institutional. Such systems required maintenance, rules, taxes, inspections, and cooperation. Dutch water authorities developed because people who shared the same vulnerable basin also shared the consequences of neglect. By the 20th century, wind power had given way to steam, diesel, and electricity. Dutch engineering also moved to a larger scale. Completed in 1932, the Afsluitdijk stretched for roughly 32 kilometers, or 20 miles, separating the former Zuiderzee from the Wadden Sea. The saltwater inlet became the freshwater IJsselmeer. The project improved protection and created possibilities for reclamation, transport, and water storage. It appeared to prove that entire bodies of water could be reorganized through national planning. But every defense creates dependency. Once people settle behind a dike, the value of the protected land grows, more homes appear, roads, farms, factories, and public services follow. A structure that once protected a rural district may later stand between a major population center and disaster. At the same time, drained soils can subside, increasing the difference between the land and surrounding water. Success does not remove the risk. It places more people behind the system that contains it. During the night of January 31st to February 1st, 1953, a severe North Sea storm surge struck the southwestern Netherlands. High water was driven toward the coast, while many people were at home. The defenses were not prepared for the combination of conditions that developed. Across Zeeland, South Holland, and western North Brabant, dikes were overtopped or breached. Records count 96 major breaches and nearly 400 smaller ones. Seawater moved into low-lying islands and polders behind them. The geography that normally supported farms and villages now trapped water behind broken defenses. Roads disappeared beneath the flood. Buildings were damaged or swept away. Telephone and transport links failed in affected districts, complicating warnings and rescue. Some communities were struck more than once as damaged dikes faced another high tide. The disaster was not a single wave moving across one coastline. It was a chain of local failures spreading through a landscape divided by islands, channels, embankments, and polders. In the Netherlands, 1,836 people died. About 200,000 hectares, roughly 770 square miles, were flooded. Tens of thousands of animals were lost. Thousands of homes and farms were destroyed, and many more were damaged. Around 72,000 residents had to leave the disaster region for an extended period. Some were taken to safer cities, while soldiers, emergency workers, crews, and local residents continued rescue and repair operations. Rebuilding houses was possible. Rebuilding a sense of safety took far longer. The flood transformed water policy into a national question. The government appointed a Delta Commission to determine how another disaster of this scale could be prevented. Its task was not merely to repair the places that had broken. The commission examined the entire southwestern delta. The central conclusion was direct. The network of islands and long tidal estuaries left too much coastline exposed. The Netherlands would have to change the shape of the delta itself. The resulting delta works became a series of 13 major flood defense projects: dams, locks, and movable storm surge barriers. Rather than strengthening every kilometer of vulnerable inland dike, engineers could close or narrow several estuaries closer to the sea. This reduced the length of coastline that required direct protection and improved connections between former islands. The plan combined civil engineering with national reconstruction, but it would take decades, and each waterway presented a different technical and environmental problem. Some inlets could be closed with fixed dams. Others required sluices to manage freshwater or locks to preserve shipping routes. Foundations had to be built in moving tidal channels where currents could undermine newly placed material. Construction crews used cableways, prefabricated concrete elements, temporary islands, specialized vessels, and layers of stone and filter material. The map of the Southwest gradually changed. Waterways that had once separated communities became crossed by roads, dams, and engineered gates. The Delta Works were not one monument completed by one generation. The first major barrier was finished in the 1950s. Other components followed through the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. Designs changed as knowledge improved and political priorities shifted. New structures had to protect communities while preserving navigation, managing river discharge, and operating under corrosive saltwater conditions. The project became a national laboratory, one where every solution created the conditions for the next, more difficult decision. The most important dispute emerged at the eastern Scheldt, known in Dutch as the Oosterschelde. The original plan called for a solid dam that would have provided a straightforward defense, but it would also have cut off the tides and transformed the saltwater estuary. Conservation groups, fishing interests, scientists, and local communities challenged the design. By then, the Netherlands was confronting a question that earlier engineering projects had often pushed aside. Could safety be achieved without erasing the ecosystem being protected? The compromise was far more complex than a closed dam. Engineers designed an open, movable barrier. Under ordinary conditions, tides would continue to pass through, keeping the eastern Scheldt saline and preserving much of its tidal character. When an extreme storm surge threatened, gates could be lowered between concrete piers. The solution did not fully restore the untouched estuary, and it greatly increased the difficulty and expense of construction, but it changed the definition of what the delta works were meant to protect. Built between 1976 and 1986, the Eastern Scheldt Barrier extends for 9 kilometers, or about 5.5 miles. Roughly 3 kilometers contain the movable sections. 65 massive concrete piers support 62 steel floodgates. The gates are approximately 42 meters, or 138 feet wide, and each weighs hundreds of metric tons. When forecasts indicate exceptionally high water, the gates can be lowered from the control center on the artificial island of Neeltje Jans. The decision depends on measurements and forecasts from the Dutch hydrometeorological system. The barrier is closed when the water level is expected to reach 3 meters above Amsterdam's reference level, known as NAP. Lowering all 62 gates takes about 75 minutes. Once closed, the barrier becomes a temporary wall across the tidal openings. After the danger passes, the gates rise again, reconnecting the North Sea to the estuary. Its strength lies not simply in blocking water, but in remaining open most of the time. Even this compromise carried a price. The delta works altered currents, sediment movement, salinity, habitats, and fisheries across the southwestern delta. Fixed dams transformed some saltwater inlets into freshwater or brackish lakes. Tidal ranges changed. Sandbanks and mudflats faced different patterns of erosion and deposition. The project saved lives and reduced flood risk, but they also demonstrated that hydraulic engineering never acts on an empty map. A barrier protects one relationship with water by changing several others. The system later expanded toward Rotterdam, where a conventional dam could have obstructed one of the world's most important shipping routes. The Maeslant barrier answered the problem with 2 enormous movable gates. They normally remain open beside the waterway, allowing ships to reach the port. During a dangerous surge, the gates swing into position and sink to close the channel. It was not part of the original Delta plan, but it extended the same principle. Protection had to coexist with the economic systems behind it. This exposes the central myth of the Netherlands. The country is often described as if it completed one heroic engineering project and permanently conquered the sea, but flood protection is not a finished structure. Pumps consume energy, dikes settle, mechanical parts corrode, computer systems require testing, forecasting models are updated, channels accumulate sediment. Every barrier must be inspected, maintained, and eventually renovated. The Dutch achievement is not that the work ended, it is that the work became permanent. The next warning came not primarily from the sea, but from the rivers. High water events in 1993 and especially 1995 exposed the vulnerability of communities along the Rhine and Maas or Mook. In 1995, large-scale evacuations were ordered as authorities feared that saturated river dikes might fail. The disaster many expected did not occur, but the emergency revealed a dangerous pattern. Higher dikes had encouraged development behind them, while forcing floodwater through an increasingly restricted corridor. The response was called room for the river. Instead of relying only on higher embankments, planners widened floodplains, relocated certain dikes, deepened side channels, lowered groins, and created routes where high water could spread more safely. Near Nijmegen, one dike was moved inland and an additional channel was created for the Waal River. The principle marked a philosophical shift. Water would not always be forced into a narrower space. In selected places, the landscape would be redesigned to accommodate it. Room for the river did not replace dikes, pumps, or storm surge barriers. It added another layer to the system. Modern Dutch water management now combines resistance with accommodation, keeping the sea out, allowing rivers space, strengthening urban drainage, protecting freshwater supplies, and designing buildings and public spaces for more extreme conditions. The old image of a nation fighting water remains powerful, but the newer strategy is closer to negotiation, deciding where water must be stopped, where it can enter, and where it should be stored. Climate change is increasing the pressure on that negotiation. Sea level is rising while parts of the land continue to subside. More intense rainfall can overwhelm urban drainage. Hotter and drier periods can reduce freshwater availability and allow saltwater to move farther inland. Higher rivers and higher seas may occur at the same time, making it more difficult to discharge water from the delta. The challenge is no longer simply to repeat the defenses of the 20th century. It is to decide which systems can still be adapted. The National Delta Program addresses flood safety, freshwater, and climate-resilient development. It is updated regularly rather than treated as a single final blueprint. Dutch authorities are strengthening primary defenses, renovating older structures, improving forecasts, and requiring water and soil conditions to influence long-term spatial planning. The aim is for major flood defenses to meet updated standards by 2050. Yet planning extends beyond that date, because the structures built today may still shape settlement patterns far into the next century. The Netherlands, therefore, depends on more than engineering. It depends on institutions that can collect taxes before disaster, maintain structures when no emergency is visible, and plan for conditions that may arrive beyond the careers of current officials. The memory of 1953 remains part of that political culture. Museums preserve testimony from survivors. Flood markers record past water levels. Annual tests and public warnings turn historical memory into procedure. The defenses are physical, but the discipline required to maintain them is social. For other coastal regions, the Dutch example offers no universal machine that can simply be copied. Wealth, geography, government capacity, ecosystems, and social priorities differ from one delta to another. But the larger lesson travels well. Flood protection works best when engineering, forecasting, land use policy, emergency planning, and environmental knowledge are treated as one system. A barrier can reduce risk. It cannot decide where people should build, how nature should be valued, or who pays for protection. Those remain political choices. Return to the low field behind the dike. The water beyond it may stand higher than the ground, yet the field remains cultivated. Not because the Netherlands won a final battle, and not because nature accepted defeat. The field exists because generations measured the water, moved it, argued over it, remembered its failures, and rebuilt their defenses when old answers became insufficient. The country below sea level survives through a promise that can never be completed. The work will continue,